Let's kind of move in here for this lecture. So Japan, um, island states, right? A series of 4 islands. There's actually multiple islands, but they're kind of divided up into 4 islands. Not necessary that you know what the 4 islands are, but it is necessary to know its location. And you can see here in the map, it's located off the coast of China, in the Pacific Ocean. It's relatively isolated up through about 400 CE. And at that time, it started to interact on a more consistent basis with China. And that's done basically through trade. And China being the dominant empire or dominant force in that region of Southeast Asia, it rules the economic activity, has influences in the cultural development of Japan. And although Japan does hold on to some of its ancient, theories in terms of religion and belief systems, and that's really true for a century or so, maybe even more, until Japan kind of breaks away a little bit later on. The ruling family in Japan, even in up through modern times, is the Yamato clan meaning family, basically. Comes around the 5th century, so around the 400s CE. It's the first and only true dynasty that is recognized in Japan. If you roll back to the modern rulers of Japan in the imperial time period, they trace their family lineage back to this time period. Shinto is one of the prominent belief systems or religion in Japan at the time, although they did have some Buddhist influences as well when China kind of makes their impact in Japan. But through most of, or not most of, through all of Japanese history, the Japanese hang on to that Shinto belief, even though they did incorporate some other elements. Worships the kami, which is a force of nature. So it was kind of based on natural forces of nature is where the religion is focused on. It encourages obedience and proper behavior. So it has some Confucius type of theories to them. Although the Japanese didn't believe in Confucianism from a government standpoint in terms of a ruling type of force, it did have some of the same type of philosophies in terms of honoring the elderly, treating people as you would be treated, that type of thing. The Yamato clan, the family, is believed to be a descendant of the sun goddess, and so the Japanese believe that the emperor was a living god. That's not unusual in Southeast Asia. Matter of fact, even today in North Korea, there are some people who believe that the ruler of North Korea since the 1950s was honored as a god. China's influence, as I talked about, around around the mid 500s, Buddhist missionaries make their way through to Japan through trade. As normally we talk about how religion spreads through trade. It's not unusual. And Japan kind of bought into some of the teachings of Buddhism, but they still hung on to their Shinto beliefs. We talked about when we studied religions, how Buddhism is a flexible belief system that allows for other theories and other practices to be incorporated. That's why a lot of Chinese are Buddhists, but they also believe in Confucius theories in terms of belief systems. You can't really be a Christian and believe in Buddhism, although you can be a Christian and believe in some of the Buddhist practices, such as meditation and karma, things of that sort. The Japanese government was kind of replicated by the bureaucratic forms of Chinese systems, where you have kind of layered systems of governing. Like our high schools kind of set up in a bureaucracy. Like you have the administration, you have the teachers, you have the guidance department, right? And you have security, and you have the student body as well. So you have that layered system of rule, which is a bureaucratic type form of government. The Japanese did not kind of buy into the theories of Confucianism, especially specific to the civil service exam, because the Japanese believed that only the people who could work in the government needed to be from a bloodline of the ruling family. And so it's kind of sometimes referred to as hereditary monarchy. Even though we don't call it the King of Japan, it's the same type of system, right? So from that standpoint, and in China, if you passed the civil service exam, you could then become a government official. That wasn't a thing in Japan. The Chinese developed into a feudal society around the same time that Europe went to a feudal society, rule of government. Not connected. It's not because one happened because the other happened type of thing. They were basically unconnected, but they happened around that same time period, around the Middle Ages, in Japan around the 12th century, so around the 1100s. Japan had kind of developed into this feudal society. Even though the terminology was a little bit different in Japan, it was the same basic system that you would see in Europe at the time. The samurai came from this time period. The code of Bushido came from this time period of the things that are Japanese in nature, but they have the same type of thing in Europe. Like, for instance, the code of Bushido in Japan would be like the code of chivalry in Europe. The samurai in Japan would be like the knight of Europe. So there's those kind of common relationships that they had, although they were unconnected. It's not like Japan wasn't influenced by Europe's feudal system. Finishing up here with Japan, the Minamoto kind of set up the system of feudalism in Japan at this time. They had the same type of layered system. Mentioned about the samurai or knights, the code of Bushido. They had that land for loyalty exchange, and peasants were allowed to live on the land as long as they worked the land, and the ruling lord or ruling family, if you will, allowed for peasants to live as long as they gave them a majority of production to them, but they were left with enough to live off of. Again, mentioned the code of Bushido, loyalty, courage, and honor. As a matter of fact, that carries on into World War II, where the Japanese soldier was known not to surrender, and they would fight to the death. As a matter of fact, the old banzai charge, if you've ever seen those, where they take a sword and they just charge their enemy, and knowing that they're probably going to die, but they're going to try and take out as many of their enemies as they can. As a matter of fact, the reason the United States decided to drop the atomic weapon, or one of the reasons, in 1945 was because of Japanese's refusal to surrender in a conventional war situation. We'll cover that a little more in detail, obviously, when we get to that point. But anyways, the kamikaze, the famous kamikaze pilots who would load their plane up with bombs and fuel tanks and stuff and attack American warships, it was based on the code of Bushido, that they felt like it was their duty and their obligation to die for the country. Moving on to Korea, again, a tributary state, a state that was controlled by trade and force by the Chinese, although the Koreans held on to some of their traditional ways of life. The Korean language is different from that of China, but Korea also practices Buddhism, and that's an influence from China. So you have that separation, but yet you have those commonalities between Korea and China as well. Again, China being the ruling dominant force in that region of the world during the Tang Dynasty, which is a part of your DBQ that you've been working on, is when that exchange, that connection between Korea and China really took hold. It is mentioned as early as the Han Dynasty, which was a dynasty that ruled prior in early history, but it was with the Tang Dynasty where the cultural exchange between those two regions really became an important thing. As I mentioned, Koreans adopted a lot of the Chinese culture, but they also adapted it as well. In other words, adopted meaning they used it, adapted that they would change it to kind of be consistent with their way of life. For instance, like I said, they adopted Buddhist teachings and Confucius theories, but yet they kept their own religion and language as well. Moving on to Vietnam, another tributary state at that time, Southeast Asia. The Vietnam was not unusually occupied by a foreign power, occupied by China for most of its early ancient history. Now they broke away from Chinese control as Korea did in the 1870s or so, but Vietnam found its way under French control by the 1880s, and then by Japanese control. And then you're talking World War II. Then you're talking the Vietnam War is when the Vietnamese finally gained their independence. So that didn't happen until the mid 1970s. So that's a pretty significant period of time, right? Again, not really. They were tolerant of Chinese control. They definitely did not cooperate with Chinese control. Only did it because they were forced to. Again, same thing as Korea, right? Buddhist theories were kind of spread into that region. Confucius idealism as well, but yet the Vietnam and the Viet people kept their own traditions, their own cultural identity. They spoke their own language. That type of thing still was prominent. All right, so that's kind of Southeast Asia. Now we're going to finish up with India, which is considered Southeast Asia as well in that region. Although we don't really connect India to Vietnam so much or Korea, as far as Asian type of theories. Anyways, India was a sultanate, meaning it was a Muslim empire. Ruled by a Muslim leader. So a Muslim leader in India is referred to as a sultanate, or a sultan, I should say. So you're talking about a culture that's still ruled prominently by Hindu beliefs, and the caste system still was in rule during this time period. Although you'll find out as history goes on, there's a division between Muslim Indians and Hindu Indians because of the difference in the religions and what they taught and what it stressed. That was the thing all through up until the mid 1900s with Gandhi and so forth. Matter of fact, the countries of Bangladesh and Pakistan were created from India as Muslim states for that purpose, to kind of satisfy the growing Muslim population that was developing in northern India as a result of the sultans and the rule of Muslim empires. As I said, it marks the rule and the rise of Islam as a major religion, mostly in northern India, where Hindu kind of kept its dominance in mid and southern India during this time period as well. As I mentioned, the Sultan, considered to be a Muslim ruler in India at the time. Why did Muslim victories occur in parts of northern India? Muslim armies were much more advanced in terms of their fighting techniques. They had different Hindu factions fighting against each other. So there was infighting within the Hindu, environment. And many Hindus of the lower caste, remember back when we talked about Hinduism and the caste system, converted to Islam because Islam taught and focused their religion on total equality of all people. They didn't believe in a caste system. So many Hindus who were in the lower caste converted because there was no real advantage to being part of the lower caste, and you were kind of basically cemented in that lower caste, whereas a Muslim you would be treated as an equal, at least in theory. And so there was a huge conversion, especially again in northern India, of many Hindus into Islam. Impact of Muslim rule. It brought a significant increase in trade into northern India through the Muslim system, the Silk Road, the trade that would connect the Middle East into parts of the Far East. So that was a huge advantage for merchants. And a lot of merchants converted to Islam as well for their economic advantages. Obviously, it's a lot easier to trade with someone when you have the same basic belief systems. There was always that religious class when Hindus and Muslims interacted. Not to say it didn't happen, but it's a lot easier if I'm converting from an economic standpoint if I'm a merchant. Many Hindus in northern India converted to Islam, as I mentioned. The vast majority of southern Indian population held on to Hindu beliefs. And again, because of the contrasting styles of Hinduism and Islam, you really couldn't be Hindu and Muslim at the same time. The theories were so different. One's monotheistic, the other is polytheistic, and then you have that same caste system in the Hindus, which was foreign to the beliefs of Islam. As I mentioned before, again, some members of the Hindu lower class or the caste system converted to Islam as a way of getting out of that rigid system that Hindu was based in. And then again, mentioned many merchants converted because of an economic advantage by trading with Muslim traders. Many Muslim traders would not trade with Hindus during that time period. The Sultan decline, the Mongol Empire, the famous Timberlane, or he was a Muslim leader. I'm sorry, he was a Mongol leader during the early 1400s at that time. And his overrunning of the northern sector of India kind of ended the Sultan rule for a period of time. Although, as we mentioned, many Mongols converted to Islam and became part of society in northern India through time as well. Mongol rule, as I mentioned, is short-lived. The Sultanate kind of reestablished itself in the 1500s, so about a 100-year period under the Mughal Empire, which re-established Muslim rule in northern India. And as I mentioned, many of the Mongols who were part of that invading force at the end of the 1300s became Muslim and assimilated into that Mongol Empire that established in the 1500s. Okay, that's it. A short, quick little thing there. Again,